So welcome to the toughness podcast. I'm Steve, and tonight it's just me. I'm flying solo. My chance is out with a stomach bug, so I'm going to be running the show. And I'm honored to have Sharon Ball on the show tonight. And it's our first therapist that we've had, and we're going to kind of dig into trauma and how it applies to men's mental health and also the awareness piece to it. So, Sharon, go ahead and introduce yourself for us, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me. I'm excited, especially to broaden the scope of information to men. And that's something later on, hopefully, we'll talk about is what they don't know, some of the symptoms that they don't know to recognize. But I have been in the field of working with clients in trauma for about 25 years and had a private practice, then a clinic downtown Nashville. And as of the last couple years, I've only been seeing about 4 to 5 clients a week due to branching out into corporate, where I am working, doing trainings on workplace psychological safety, um, culture change. And the way that I address that is through a trauma informed lens. So it's a little bit of a twist, but it resonates with people in the corporate space and it works. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. So what got you into this field? Did you kind of know this maybe as a young adult, and it was
Mm.
something you're interested in going into higher education? Like, how did all that come
Sure. Oh, I love that question. So originally, this will be fun for you because I don't think I've shared this with you. I originally wanted to be a police officer.
about? Really?
So
Wow.
going through, I'm trying to think of, you get picked in high school to go to Washington, D.C., and I'm forgetting the organization. Basically, you land in Washington, D.C., and they simulate a city and you get to pick whatever role you want to be in. Well, from that, I got chosen to do a junior police academy
Hmm.
in Arizona. So that kicked me off into my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And from that, I exited my college years and worked for Arizona Child Protective Services.
Oh, okay.
And honestly, I thought that's where I was going to stay.
Hmm.
I really wanted to run the agency. I worked in the South Phoenix precinct, which was our poorest part of Phoenix, and I loved it. I loved working with the people. Um, it was a fit for me. However, when I moved, it launched me into, do I really want to get into law or into counseling?
Hmm.
And so I reflected back on my days with CPS, and the thing that I noted about the judicial system is as much as the attorneys and the judges tried to help these children, they could only go so far with these kids.
Hmm.
And the kids, I think I had at one time maybe 75 kids on my caseload.
Wow.
And I was in charge of managing their therapy appointments, making sure their parents were doing the reunification plan, all of that. And the greatest impact that these kids had was their therapist.
Hmm.
And it was the lifeline for many of those children from little Steve, little people all the way up. And so I think that determined my route of going into psychology versus law in my postgraduate. And that's where I landed. Eventually got my license here in Tennessee, popped up my practice. And from that, I was still, because my early involvement with CPS, trauma had always been, kind of the heartbeat of helping people work through that.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah. Have you ever worked with police officers in a trauma capacity, like through therapy and stuff like that?
Yes. So, I think over the years, whether it's, police officers, firefighters, first responders, anyone that goes out into a natural disaster zone or comes back, processing with them has been over the course of the 25 years off and on.
Okay.
And that's a different, how you address trauma within the police force is different than you would a civilian. similar to military.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How I would work with a veteran or an active duty soldier is different than a civilian. So even though they might encounter the same traumas, there's, because of their position of authority, because of their position in the community, it adds another layer
Mm-hmm.
to unraveling it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, with your background and your experience, and you mentioned working with children, and that's really incredible. My mother was a social worker for years. She worked for Department of Health and Human Services, worked for youth villages. So I kind of, I heard about a lot of that growing up. And she actually worked with CASA here in Williamson County
Yes.
after she retired. So kind of familiar with that area. As far as your counseling goes, would you say you work more with men or more with women, or is it kind of a combination? Or even you mentioned children, would it be? Do you have like
Sure.
a specialty that you prefer, or
When
um,
it comes to trauma,
mhm,
the my expertise is in trauma, so that crosses all demographic.
right?
Um, but over the years, I began with children, and I'm glad I did. I think past about 10 years in, it shifted more into the adult side. But what made that kind of unique for me is I can see adults as little children, and I
Mm,
can see little children where they're going to go as adults.
gotcha.
So spanning the lifespan of a person's developmental process, you can begin to see patterns, and these children, you can see them in the adults,
Mm,
where they're headed if the behavior, or conduct disorder doesn't get, um, there's no intervention for it, or the ADHD child who's so misunderstood
yeah.
and gets, labeled, but really is this brilliant, amazing little person. You can see who they are when they arrive in adulthood because I'm seeing adults too.
Okay.
So I will rarely right now, unless there is, like a community school shooting or
Mhm.
something like that, then I'll be called, to help. But most of the time in the last 10, 15 years, it's been with adults. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you see a change? Say it's 2024. Do you see a change? And let's focus on men for a second.
Yeah.
You see men being more open to therapy when it comes to trauma, and I'm not really talking about the veteran community or a first responder, more just a normal everyday man that's maybe struggling with some childhood trauma or something of that nature. Do you feel like men are more open to therapy nowadays, or?
I think the thing that is confusing about our statistics on men is the fact that I think the American Psychological Association says 35 to 45% of our men do not even know how to see their trauma responses. They're not even aware that they've had a trauma occur. However, 70% of men, once you talk to them, they will have a record of a childhood trauma, at least one. So we know that it's prevalent
Mhm.
that men do go through trauma, but I don't think they're taught to recognize it or be aware of it. They're taught to push through.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I know my generation, we were taught to just suck it up,
Right.
don't talk about your feelings because you're weak. If you show any
Right.
kind of emotion when it comes to being sensitive, or hey, I'm not, I don't feel right, or this happened to me, you were just told shut up and move on. So, and I know, at least from my experience, a lot of men don't go to therapy until it's kind of a last resort. So maybe their wife's they're on the way out the door and it's go get help or I'm gone, or they get arrested and it's a court ordered thing like, hey, you need to go to
Right.
anger management. It's not really a voluntary, from my experience and people I've talked with. It's not a voluntary thing. Like, hey, you know what? Something's going on in me. I don't know what it is. I need to go talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of curious if that's more of a, maybe men are more open minded nowadays than maybe in previous years.
I think maybe they're more open-minded, they're just not aware that they
Hmm.
need it
Gotcha. Okay.
until the house is burning,
Yeah. Yeah.
there might be a fire in the fireplace, and let's say, the fireplace is closed, the damper is closed or whatever that thing's called, so a little smoke is coming out, but the fireplace isn't burning the house down.
Hmm.
I think men can uniquely just continue to smell that smell and almost ignore it.
Mm.
And then the chimney starts to burn, and then the house starts. I mean, I think it's just a different way of looking at trauma. I think another difference is women as little girls, they're taught to talk
Mm.
about their heartache. So they grow up with this verbal, emotional language that they're very comfortable with. Little boys are not taught to talk verbally about their feelings. So they grow up and they don't have the verbal language to describe, or they feel uncomfortable with it. It feels uncomfortable to them. So you have cultural stigma, you have kind of a level of denial or lack of awareness. And then I think the language barrier of not learning it at a young age and being comfortable with it.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Just a few of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know with me personally, I have a 6-year-old little boy, and I try to. I'm no expert, but I try to get him to talk if something's wrong, and so he'll kind of get used to like, hey, it's okay to talk about how you feel or something, happened at school versus just kind of the sit in silence or eat your feelings like I was kind of just around as a kid and as a young adult. Because I know a lot of men, and that's kind of where our goal was with this podcast is to show that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be transparent if you're in a safe place to do it
Sure.
and to get help and to look at mental health kind of like a physical health. Like you got to constantly be working on it. And I know for me, that's something I put mental health on the back burner and I did everything else. But mentally, I just was like, I'm good. Like, I don't want to go talk to this
Mhm.
person. Right. And I would try therapy and, I had some mixed reviews with it and some different things. But for me, it was always kind of, I'd rather go for a run or I'd rather go work out and not sit and talk about what happened to me as a kid or the not so good things in my life that have caused me to self sabotage and do other things.
I think something I've noticed, because I travel a lot across the country, and majority of the people that I'm training are just your everyday average folks, people like you and me. And I the difference I see between men and women are more connected with the 5 different spheres of who they are, which is, I call them the MERPs: mentally, emotionally, relationally, physically, and spiritually. Men tend to dial into maybe 1 or 2 of those because that's how they've been taught or that's the culture in which they live in. So you just tapped into physically, right?
Mm.
They
Yeah.
probably try to dial in relationally with people, but when it comes to the mental and the emotional, I think that's just kind of a little more taboo. It's getting better, but when we teach and train on the MERPs, it allows a man in business, in corporate, to go, oh, I've got to address these 5 areas. I'm made up of 5 different areas, and all of them have to be in balance.
Okay.
Uh,
Is that kind of like the body awareness that you'd mentioned when we talked previously? Like now that if I'm in touch with my emotional health, I know if I'm getting butterflies or I can feel my adrenaline going up when a name's mentioned or a situation doesn't feel comfortable. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
I think that connects all of it.
Okay.
So, we've talked. You're a type 8, so we have talked before that you're kinesthetically intelligent with your 5 senses. So you absorb what's going on in your world through your body, your gut,
Mhm.
and then it connects to your emotional, mental. But
Mhm.
I think in general, men just forget that there's these 5 different, slices to the pie. Let's say
Okay.
that make up who you are because they dial in on the physical or the relational, and that mental and the emotional just it doesn't get addressed for the numerous reasons that we've already
Mhm.
stated. Yeah.
Yeah, and I used to kind of see mental toughness as I can run a marathon, but I
Yeah.
didn't have the emotional toughness. So I'd be watching, a cheesy movie and hiding that I was crying over like a dog getting hit by a car, something like a guy you wouldn't think would cry over. But I always
Yeah.
felt like, oh, I'm mentally tough. I can go, run in the woods for a couple hours, or just I can push through pain. But when it came to the emotional side, I wasn't connected, and I'm still. kind of working on that, but it's hard. I mean, for me personally, it's way harder than anything physical.
Well, when we were training the other day and you made the comment, you're not going to fall into the abyss. I was doing the pull up or the
Yeah,
drop.
yeah.
What was it? The drop, whatever it is,
Negative chin up. Yeah,
the negative chin up.
yeah.
Okay, right there, that described to me the mental awareness. I was not dialed into it mentally.
Mhm.
I was dialed into it. My physically, my fingers were getting sweaty.
Yeah.
Um, and it took that phrase for me to check in mentally and go, oh, yeah, I'm not going to fall if I fall. I'm not going to fall into the abyss.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the mental toughness. And I think the difference between men and women are women, and again, it's cultural too, but I also think that it's it's God given in both different ways. But women are more attuned to the emotional awareness of what's going on, and men tend to have more of that mental toughness. Although I'm not saying that either one can't do the other, it's just
Right.
bringing all of those five spheres on board, especially if you're recovering from trauma, because what trauma will do, and it surfaces in everyone differently, it's going to shut down those five slices of the pie.
Mm.
And what we know from research is it ends up storing itself actually in the body. Your body has that awareness, and it stores it there. So you might not be emotionally connected to the trauma or mentally remember it, or you're just pushing through. You're living in a place of what I call strategic denial, but your body feels it. Your
Mm.
body's wearing it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know me personally, I hid my trauma for a long time, and kind of forgot about an incident that happened to me as a kid. And out of nowhere one day, someone said something, and I went right to that place. But I hadn't really, hadn't thought about it, since I was a kid, and it did throw me off. My whole body kind of was like, whoa! It was like a alarm bells going off, and I wanted to just retreat and kind of pull back, and okay, this isn't a good place to be. I need to go. So that makes sense. I mean, it definitely makes sense. Um,
So
well, let's.
experience.
Oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, no.
Well, I was just gonna say, experiencing a trigger like that's when you know something is still unresolved. Something still has access to a very painful experience. And in trauma recovery, your work is not only to heal for yourself, but also when you encounter the world and you have trigger points everywhere you go, because we can't make the world be different so
Mhm,
that someone who's walking through trauma and they're recovering doesn't get triggered. It really is up to the victim. So
mhm,
I always try to tell my victims, it's the trauma, you didn't cause it. That's not, it happened to you, but it's your responsibility to heal from it. And it sucks. It stinks, but
mhm.
that also allows you to have your personal agency and your power back when you go down that road of recovery.
Yeah, and that makes sense because a lot of the bad events in my life, I was able to kind of go back and tie to unresolved childhood trauma because
Yep.
I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to address it. So I used other outlets, self sabotage methods. Like for me, a big one was alcohol,
Mhm.
and trying to numb it versus saying, "Hey, lean into it, figure out how to heal from this." I just said, "F that. I'm gonna not think about it." But it would come out in very destructive, negative ways. And
Mhm.
I'm lucky now that I actually have a partner that I can talk to about anything, and I've been able to kind of release some of that. I mean, it's still there, but I was able to kind of release some of that, so it's very freeing, and it goes to show, at least for me personally, how much power that really can have over you. Especially, I mean, I'm 45, and this stuff happened at 5, so
Yep.
40 years ago, and it's amazing to look at kind of the almost the path of destruction that it
Mhm.
caused. So it's a good point that you make about that.
And for your listeners, a great place to start, especially with childhood trauma, is to, just Google adverse childhood experiences, and there's a checklist. I think it's of 10.
Mm.
And that's where we can kind of gauge 70% of our population has experienced at least one trauma. But I would venture to say most men, when they look at those adverse childhood experiences, they'd be shocked that what they experienced as a child is actually on that trauma list.
Mm.
And that's so helpful. That's a quick just gauge. You tally it up and it kind of tells you where you're at. But most of the time, we're just not aware that our childhood has had a trauma. So.
But yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it'd be nice if there was a way to maybe inform people at a younger age, or let's just focus on men. Like, say when you're in high school, somehow convincing a high school student, hey, if you've ever had these weird feelings, or it's a safe place, but it'd be good to talk about. Like, I did a sports psychology class in college, but that was focused on performance in baseball. I took it for baseball. The guy was a former baseball coach in college, and I thought, man, I never thought about the psychological component to playing a game. But
Yep.
it'd be cool as a young man to have maybe a resource to say. But I don't know how many teenagers are going to want to sit and talk about their feelings. But it would have definitely probably it would have changed my trajectory big time. If I'd been open-minded enough to do it. Probably not. I probably would have said, F that. I'm not doing that. But because I would like to see more men kind of take that step into being more open-minded, at least my generation, and saying, hey, I do need to go talk to somebody. I do need to. It's not healthy to be pissed off all the time and be full of anger and rage and think I'm a badass because I'm, acting a certain way. But that was kind of what I was drawn to at a young age. I saw that as cool, and that's what a real man is. Now I know that's not. That's just
Right.
purity and probably childhood trauma that's
Yep.
been dealt with. So
Defense mechanisms, I think a lot of our children, when people say, oh, it's such a bad child, I'm like, no, no, they're not bad children. They're just children who haven't figured out how to work through whatever it is that's in them. And really, I was reading the other day, Steve, I forget the woman who said this, but I loved how she explained it. The parent's role in a child growing up replaces the frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that's not really fully developed till 25. And it's all of the decision making, the critical thinking skills part of the brain. So as parents, the call for us is we're actually acting as our child's frontal lobe so they can figure out how to make good decisions and how to work through heartache and pain. And to broaden that, I think for boys, I wish every man who walks this earth could understand that even when a young man doesn't feel like they're listening to you, they're listening. They're listening. You might not see the behavior come out that you want, but they're logging it. And so the more that men are talking to young men about recovery and what to do with anger and what to do with these impulsive behaviors that sabotage or make them feel better just temporarily, that's where I think the modeling starts, so with our coaches, our teachers at school, the parents, I think that's very, very effective. You just don't think that you're doing any good, but you're at least opening the conversation up.
Right, and you're right, because I know kids are always watching. They're always
Yes.
evaluating to see how you're going to react to my little boy will say things sometimes, and I think he does it just to see how I'm going to respond. But yeah, it's definitely a good patience test sometimes to see if you can. And I think me personally, it's helped being more self-aware, being more open-minded to working on myself, so I can transition over into that parenting role because I'm a single parent. So it helps me maybe stay more calm now than I would have probably 5 years ago.
Right, right.
Because I try not to, I try to take a breath and think, and okay, don't react, just respond
Mhm.
based on it. And I'm not perfect. Sometimes I don't do that, but it does keep me more self-aware. So that's a really good point, especially with the younger boys are kind of watching to see, because I mean, and we've talked about this before. I mean, I think a lot of younger guys are looking for a mentor or
Mm-hmm.
a guy they want to kind of, hey, I want to be like that dude, or that guy's cool. And sometimes as a grown man, you just don't think about that. You're like, this kid's kind of distant, or he's not really talking. He doesn't like me. So that makes sense to just put it that
Mm-hmm.
way. Like you said that.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about
Sure.
your book here. So our viewers
Yes.
can see it. And it's Reclaiming You, and it's using the Enneagram to move from trauma to resilience. And I've been reading this book, and I kind of wanted you to go over, maybe define what an Enneagram test is, and maybe we can just talk briefly about some of the different personality traits. And feel free to pick on me, because we already know which one I am, so we can,
No,
we can
sorry.
pick on. But
Yeah.
and I'm eight, and I'm proud of it. I like the eights. I'm rolling with the eights. So although my favorite number is 7, but I like
Oh, yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's your wing. You've got that on your wing. Yeah. So the Enneagram, Ennea stands for 9 in Greek, and gram is picture. And so, you could see the symbol, which is a mapping system, which has all 9 types that go around the circle. And the Enneagram goes back, some say from ancient wisdom passed down through the years. And in, the early 60s or 70s, psychologists picked it up and started using it in their work. And for me, it's kind of a typology for people. It allows me to understand a person's motivation and that it's different than probably mine. It helps me understand why they do what they do, think the way they think, and feel the way they feel, which might be different than my own type. And then to add to that, then we've got, it's an amazing, I hate to use the word tool. It's not really a tool. It's a guide. We've got that allows us to just see people uniquely, differently. So out of that 9, we also have subtypes, which means there's 27 flavors. So 3 flavors to each of those 9 types. And it allows me to sit back and lower my expectations of someone else and say, oh, maybe that's why they're responding that way. And it's not, maybe not take it personal, or it's different than my way of responding. And then when you lay in the trauma factor to it, then that's a whole nother, each of our personality types are impacted by trauma in a different way. Mm-hmm. I remember our personalities are formed at an early age in our childhood, our egos in our childhood, early childhood, based on the environment around us. We learn very quickly, how to be seen, how to feel safe, and how to be heard. And so that's paramount. And then when, as a little person, you figure that out, you just keep doing it. So you produce these patterns of behavior that people see. Mm-hmm. And with that, we have to be very careful when we talk about personality types to not type other people, because what we're seeing is their behavior. We're not seeing their motivation. Okay. So you and I might have, the same behavior. I can have a reactive response too. You could be reactive, but our motivation for being reactive is completely different.
Gotcha.
And that's what allows me as a therapist to treat people more individually. And I think just as a person going out into the world, it has helped me in many situations that I've been involved in where it helps me assess and sit back and just go, there's probably more to this person than what I'm seeing right now. Mm-hmm. A little more grace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question for you then.
Sure. Yeah.
As a high performer,
yeah,
how do you not set expectations on other people? Maybe not set the bar so high that you set for yourself. Do you have any advice for that?
Whew.
That jumped out at me when you said expectations, because I personally struggle with that.
Yeah.
I have very high expectations for people that I respect, people in leadership positions, and when those expectations are not met, it's hard for me to give grace and I usually don't say anything. It's just more of an internal thing. But I struggle with that.
So something that you just said jumped out at me. There are people in positions of authority that you probably have more of a higher expectation for.
Hmm.
Is it okay?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a different, I think that that would be kind of an 8 expectation that the people in authority in our world, in our community, in our groups do better. And if they don't, then 8s take it on to course correct the behavior of the people in authority. I would venture to say that you might not be so passionate about the expectation if they weren't in a position of authority. That you might have a little more grace around, the average Joe
Mm-hmm.
or whatnot. But because of that position of authority, that's going to be like a unique um, thing for the 8s or even sometimes 6s. So lowering the expectations for me, because I am a high performer, it looks like the phrase for me that I have had to rehearse. Um, Ever since my divorce, I have had a kind of like an awakening internally of what I need to work on and my own healing experience. But the phrase meet people where they're at has just been huge for me. And it came out of meeting myself where I was at, which I didn't like at all. I
Yeah,
was in such a humbling, it was like, that was not a good place.
yeah,
But my therapist really had me just sit with myself. You got to sit there, kid, and be with yourself. And then from that, it's like, if I can sit with myself in the yickiness of myself and the things that I don't like about myself, then I can definitely meet people where they're at too and not expect anything more from them.
yeah. That's good advice. Yeah, that's really good advice.
Not saying I do it every day,
Yeah, yeah.
but
No, it's
that's
definitely.
my, that's what
Yeah,
I try. Yeah.
but you nailed it. I mean, I'm definitely more or have less expectations for maybe the average person
Uh-huh.
than I do. And I'll just use this example, and it may upset some folks, but I'm going to use it. In my opinion, if you wear a uniform for a living, police officer, EMT, firefighter, I think you should wear that uniform accordingly. It should be squared away. You should look squared away and look the part. And so if I see an individual, let's take police because I'm former law enforcement,
Right.
if they don't look the part, I automatically don't respect them.
Right.
I
Right.
respect the job, but I'm like, this guy's he's a shit
Because
show.
he's not taking it seriously.
Yeah, because it was like ingrained in me at a young age, even playing baseball. I mean, I had coaches, everybody looks the same. Everybody wears these socks and they wear
Right.
these
Right.
cleats. And so I've always kind of carried that into, like right now, the local department has low regs on facial hair. If I was back in that role, I would not have this beard because I think it looks unprofessional in uniform.
Okay.
So I would shave it off. I wouldn't have any facial hair. But that's just me. That's just how I am. But because I would see a guy like with a beard like mine, like that dude, why you got that beard in a uniform? That's trash. Like my old Marine Corps drill instructor would say, get that trash off your face and go shave.
Right.
So I mean,
So
but that's how I'm wired.
yeah, it's maybe how you're wired, but also the overlay of your environment around you throughout the years. Your
Hmm.
former
Yeah,
military, law enforcement. So all of that reinforces an expectation of, you know, do your job, but for an 8, it's like with emphasis.
yeah, 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 for sure, for sure. Because
Exclamation point, exclamation
yeah,
point.
because you wanna show whoever you're going to help on a call or a situation that you know what you're doing and you look the part. I mean, on the force continuum, and you know this, I'm sure. Officer presence is number one. So if
Right.
I come and if you're involved in a situation, and usually if the cops show up, it's not a good thing, and I look squared away, you're probably going to have more confidence in me. If I come
Mhm.
looking like I'm just disheveled and don't know what's going, like this
Right.
dude, like we're screwed. you know, like, we're screwed. What's going to happen here? So, and I'm like that in my job now as a trainer. If I
Yeah.
see other trainers that don't walk the walk and don't eat healthy and don't work out, I'm kind of like, come on, man. I mean, I
Right.
struggle with that. I mean, I just do.
Yeah.
So
So, as much as 8s have all of these wonderful strengths, and I would encourage people to get into the book because there's more types than just the 8, but we're using you as an example. You know, 8s can struggle with judgment. So
Oh, yeah.
they, you know, they make that quick that quick analysis.
Yeah.
And again, it's not that just 8s, you know, have an issue. All of our types have these vulnerabilities to not the nice kind of things, right? Um, it's when we do good work and we work on ourselves, that's when we can see that as, you know, this is what makes me vulnerable, and then flip it around. Because I guarantee you, if you were to flip judgment around and look at the opposite of that, you know, you're in a place of wanting things to be just, to be fair. And we need that kind of person in the world. So, I mean, I think we're just using you as an example.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. And I'm hoping through the book that I will learn how to give more grace for other personality types, because the world wouldn't be a good place if everybody was just like me.
Exactly.
We need to
Yeah.
be different. And so, and I can meet people where they are in most areas, but really, like we spoke earlier, it's church is a big one for me that I struggle with. The Christian title, that's a whole other conversation, but I struggle with that title, especially people in leadership, and try not to be judgmental, but it's more of the analogy of finding someone to kind of look up to and say, hey, I would like to not idolize him, but I'd like to be more like this individual because they are squared away. They didn't have the bumps and, you know, bad experiences like I did. So I was like, hey, I'm going to lock in on this guy. And I've always done that. Every job I had wearing a uniform, I would do that. I would zero in on the guy that I thought that's who I want to be like. And I would kind of watch them and be like, okay, cool. And the opposite of that, I'd see another guy in that role, but I don't want to be like that dude.
Right.
You know, because and especially in the my experience in the law enforcement world.
Yeah.
Military is a little different, but yeah, law enforcement for sure.
Right.
Like, that guy's not squared away.
Right.
But and some people say that's cocky or that's arrogant, but I saw it as I need to strive to be like that guy because he's better than me. Versus, you know, kind of like playing ball. You want to play with someone better so you get better at that
Right.
sport. But yeah, so that's a good way to put it in perspective for sure.
Yeah.
What as far as the Enneagram and the book, is it possible to, let's say I'm an 8, we've already determined that.
Yeah.
And you said that this forms at an early childhood age, right? So you're really young, your personality forms. Is there a way to almost change your personality and become, let's say if I'm an 8, I could become a 2? No.
No, but there's different levels of health within each of our types. So the goal would be to become more aware of what, you know, your defenses are, how your ego is driving a situation.
Mhm.
And the more aware you are of that, you can make shifts in your thinking and feeling and behaving, so that you can become your better version. And then you have on that diagram too, you've got ways in which you can use the lines. So you have a line to the 2, you've got a line to the 5, and then you have your wings on either side. So on either side of the 8 is the 9 and the 7. And I would say, you know, you need both wings of an airplane to land. So you
Mhm.
need both wings on either side of your main type. So it gives you a lot that you can, you know, work on, but your type is fixed. It's there to stay with you.
Okay.
Now I
Yeah,
will say, if
go ahead.
when I'm doing trauma recovery, or if someone is listening and they got a trauma that's unresolved, I rarely, unless they came in and they knew their type before the
Mhm.
trauma, I never type when someone's recovering from trauma. I always do trauma informed care, because the trauma responses will make you look like certain types on the Enneagram when really
Mhm.
you're not. You're responding out of the trauma. So we don't want to convolute typing a person, um, when they're in trauma recovery.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was trying to flip to the chapter I was in on chapter 4, who I saw where you kind of where you said the wings coming off the 8, and so I was kind of looking at that. That makes sense though, and I think I did that when I went through the personality test and kind of looked at as best I could pre-trauma, because my trauma was very
Right.
early in life. But it that's the one that the description of the 8 is where I really kind of could relate to, especially the anger piece. And we haven't touched on anger yet, but I know
Right.
anger is a big thing in men, at least kids from the 80s, like my generation. I don't know about this younger generation. I mean, you
Yeah.
know me, I'm a metalhead and it's angry,
Right.
but I
Right.
can identify with that. I love it. I mean, it's intense, it's aggressive. But yeah, so I think anger is probably
Mhm.
a thing that men may not quite understand, but they just tap into it because it
Right.
feels like that's what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
You want to touch on that a little bit with the anger piece?
Yeah, I think for you, because you are an 8, we'll start with that first. You're in the body center of intelligence. So 8s, 9s, and 1s, they have this unique relationship with anger. Now, that doesn't mean that the rest of the types cannot feel angry or get angry, but for your type in particular, it is the initial feel that is the feeling you feel upon impact when something negative happens, um, or you sense something is about to happen. It
Mhm,
goes to anger. The heart center people, their relationship with shame is more significant. That's what they feel when something goes wrong. And then our head center people, it's more fear based. So when something doesn't feel right or sit right, it they're flagged with fear.
mhm,
But when you talk about anger in general with men, I think, that is just kind of a cultural expectation or what's taught. Because when you shut down all the other emotions for a little boy can express sadness, a little boy can express disappointment, a little boy can't say, I'm discouraged, a little boy, when you shut down the range of all of those feelings, but anger is acceptable, or maybe anger is not acceptable, but you shut down all those other feelings, what's going to happen? Anger.
mhm. Yep.
So I don't think it's just 80s kids. I think it's in general, we got to do a better. And I put this on, I think if men could teach young men, the little guys, what how anger can be a really healthy, um
Mhm,
it could be, because it's like the red light at a stop sign.
mhm,
It alerts you screeching, come to a screeching halt, stop.
mhm,
You are going to get into an accident if you don't stop.
mhm,
That's what anger is. It's the alarm inside your head that says, well, for you to be in your body, that says stop. This has got to stop. So it's a very powerful emotion. Wielded in the right way, disciplined in the right way, can have huge impact in our world and in relationships. But I just don't think the little guys are being taught, how to use it.
mhm. Well,
And they're not being taught to use the other feelings.
right, yeah, and that makes sense. And I want to use myself as an example real quick.
Okay.
So, about 2 years ago was the first time I ever publicly shared my testimony. And I'm not going to get into the whole thing on here because it'll take a while. But there was there's a video of it. So I was on a podcast and I did like a photo shoot to introduce the podcast, and I was 100% transparent. Went through the whole gambit of my background, and I forgot about this video. Well, I'm being asked to be on this show again because I'm going to be on. I was their first guest, and I'm going to be their 100th episode next year in 25. So I watched this video. I found it in my phone. It's about 8 minutes, and I've watched it about 3 times in the last few days. And I've had this underlying just anger in me, and I'm not
Mhm.
mad at anyone but myself. But it really stems for me. It's the shame of listening to that testimony and all the stuff that I'm proud of where I'm at today. So I'm not discouraged about my walk right now. But it kind of just it stirred up a lot of these emotions in me. But I've noticed I've been kind of on edge the last few days. And I think it really stemmed from watching that, and it got me upset. It put me in a weird headspace. So I felt ashamed and hearing my story again, I've lived it, but instead of it keeping me kind of maybe depressed, or maybe that's the wrong word, maybe like withdrawn, it kind of has this underlying anger in me. So could you kind of maybe hit on that or explain that a little bit?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's great that you identified there's a shame component there,
Hmm.
because shame is, it tells you that you're an inherently defective. There is something inherently wrong with you. And when I work with people with shame, that's absolutely wrong. You are not inherently defective, but that's what it wants you to do. And when I think of, you know, you then feel this anger that comes from that. Anger is an active emotion. Anger is an active, it's got energy, it's got power to it. Shame, it's like you feel stuck in it. It's kind of like quicksand.
Hmm.
You're going to drown in shame. So, you have these two, and you're more familiar with anger. It's more comfortable territory. So, for you to jump from shame into anger makes sense, because this is movement. Your body, go, doer, energy kind of guy. And shame is going to make you feel too stuck. But I would say you would need to go back to that shame component, not, recognize the anger, don't dismiss it. But I think the root, if you look at a tree, I think the root is probably the shame, and the anger is above the surface.
Hmm.
So in that situation, and I think, Steve, in all our paths, there for all of us, even the people that you think you pedestalize, for all of us, there are places of shame or things that we've done that make us just go, ugh, this just makes me sick to my stomach. Why did I do that? And you have to forgive yourself, because that shame is what makes you feel stuck in it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think for me personally, I agree with you. You got to forgive yourself, and I have for the most part. I think for me personally, and I kind of described this on another episode. It's the daily reminder of how my actions and behavior affected other people. And I'll just go ahead and say it. I mean, I co-parent, and I see the impact it's had on my son because he's only 6.
Mm-hmm.
So I forgive myself because I could have went the other way. I could have just said, "Hey, I'm a piece of crap, and I'm just going to keep living like one." But I have pulled out of that. But it's kind of the, I don't want to say daily reminder, but kind of that reminder, because you're living this different life now, and I'm not in this life as much as I want to be. So
Right.
that's kind of where that shame piece kind of hovers,
Mhm.
but it's kind of a touch and go emotion. Like I might go a week without thinking about it. I might go a month, but then it just kind of goes boom and it hits me. And that's when I get, like you said, I tap into my body, and I'm like, I have this underlying intensity, which turns into anger. And I've done a pretty good job of controlling my emotions,
Mhm.
except
Mhm.
driving, but,
Right.
but, but, but it does come out sometimes without me wanting it to. So it kind of seeps out when I don't want
Mhm.
it to really come out. But that's a good point that you made about shame.
And you're touching on too, the impact of divorce, even
Mhm.
years after, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's where, in all of our families that have gone through divorce, I have too. I have situations that come up with my kids, and it's been years since the divorce, but it's a reminder.
Hmm.
It can be a trigger. Or simple, even just a simple reminder, and then grief just overwhelms me,
Hmm.
and I'm like, oh, because in a divorce situation, there, as much healing as you do, you're constantly healing, in my opinion,
Hmm.
because there's reminders every day, every year, of intact family, divorced family, blended family, and
Hmm.
everything that you're not. So sometimes, that shame can be muddled with a lot of grief,
Mm.
just sheer sadness about, and maybe, sitting with that a little bit, you might parcel out that some of that might just be a deep grief.
Okay.
Um, because I think that, even though in the book we classify divorce as a little t trauma, I think it can bounce back and forth depending upon what kind of divorce it was. Was it complicated? Was it complex? And then the aftermath of it. Is it because the aftermath of some divorces just are hard
Mhm.
and they don't stop. So
Mhm.
that can be little t traumas can turn into a big T trauma if it's never resolved.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
So would that be, and it talks about this in the book a bit, would that be like kind of a trauma loop because it could be a big T versus a little T trauma? Would that be accurate to say that?
So a trauma loop is when your brain gets stuck on and it repeats
Mm.
the occurrence.
Okay.
When I'm talking about a little T trauma versus turning into a big T trauma, it's the little T trauma never resolves.
Mhm.
So kind of like a chronic stressor. Let's say you had a client that had Crohn's disease, and it was horrible, and it never found resolution. Over 6 to 7 to 8 years, one might put that into the category big T trauma because it completely impacts the illness impacts all of their life, whereas it started out as a little T trauma, you know,
Gotcha.
but it never resolved.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think grief's a good way to put the kind of explain maybe the shame portion of it. It's more for me the grief of not being present with my son 100% of the time. And I know
Hmm.
that's not realistic because I'm
Hmm.
divorced. But for me, the grief is more about my son because it's almost like you compartmentalize. He has a world that I'm not a part of now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like he's at basketball practice tonight,
Hmm.
because he's with his mom tonight. So and I understand the reality of divorce and how
Right.
that works, but that's a good way to put it. It is more of a grief thing for me than maybe the shame because I said this on our last episode. We talked about divorce, and I'm a better dad
Mm.
divorced than I was when I was married. So I'm grateful to have the relationship that I do have with my son. But I never looked at it, I guess, as grief. I just saw it more as my shame, internalizing. Well, if you hadn't have done all this dumb stuff, you would have.
Yeah. Well,
And
and it could be that. I'm just throwing it out there that, I do think men struggle with recognizing grief and allowing themselves to grieve.
Mhm.
What does that look like for men, especially in the United States,
Yeah.
to allow themselves to grieve? When I was in Sri Lanka doing tsunami relief work, I was I don't even know. I wasn't shocked, but I was just in awe over the way that the Sri Lankan community grieved. It was very verbal. You knew it. You knew that they were distraught and there was no hiding it. I think in the United States, we have a different relationship with grief.
Mhm.
We don't outwardly show it. It's kind of stoic, more maybe like the British way, right? Um, and I think that does us a disservice. So, it doesn't mean you have to fall. I need you to be crying, but recognizing that you are grieving is a good place to start. I mean,
Yeah.
that just a thought. Yeah. Not you,
That's
but in general, men,
yeah.
what's their relationship like with grief?
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And it's kind of like you hear stories of men where they've never seen their dad cry, or even at a funeral, you don't see any emotion whatsoever. So that's a really good way to put that. So um, yeah, that's great. Well, what do you have on the like what's on the horizon for you? Like so you've got this book and you're working on another book, correct?
I am working on another book. Yes, that's fun. I'm working on it right now.
Nice.
What do I have on the horizon? I've got a couple certification classes coming up. So if you want to learn more about the Enneagram and trauma, you can go to my website, SharonKBall.com, and get on the wait list for that.
Right.
And then we're pulling together a fantastic 9-day, I don't know if you want to call it a summit or retreat in the Netherlands in July. And that's posted on the website as well. But you'll be able to, some of the best Enneagram teachers, will be over there and we'll be teaching. I'll do a special track on trauma and the Enneagram. So I'm really excited about that. And then we kick off in February. My team starts traveling. We get back into the corporate spaces. And then I do a lot of sitting at the baseball field watching my son. Hopefully, we went to the doctor today, and I think we might have to have surgery on his elbow.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so he's wrestling around with his own feelings about that, but definitely at the baseball field watching baseball.
yeah, that's the best sport. Baseball is the best sport.
I know it. I love it.
So we're gonna put in the notes for the episode how to contact you
Okay.
with your book Reclaiming You. I know it's on Amazon. Is that the best place to get it? Okay.
Yep.
We'll put that in the notes as well so people can find it. So kind of what I like to do at the end of each episode, what's one piece of advice that you have for, let's say, a guy out there that's listening to this podcast that is in a place where maybe he's not ready to face or recognize his trauma, but knows he needs to make changes and focus on his mental health. Do you have like kind of a quick piece of advice for that guy who might be on the fence about going to seek someone maybe like yourself?
Sure. Start someplace. If you're not ready to get into a therapist, get online. There's a lot of different places you can just start to read, just an article or something. 988, dialing 988 will get you immediately to a licensed professional. I think it's 988 pound 4 for veterans, but the same, phone number. Start someplace. You don't have to stay where you're at. There's always a horizon ahead, and if you are struggling, I think the last place I would want you to be is stuck in it. So if you just start something, whether it's reading articles or listening to a good podcast, great. If you need a referral, reach out and get a referral. I think that's the other thing that for men, Steve, statistically, they say, there's a good portion of men that don't want to go to therapy because of a past experience with a therapist or a counselor. I think like 20% of men reported that. Can't keep on it because you're going to find someone. If you don't click with the first one, don't keep yourself in the therapy, on the couch. keep looking. Find someone that fits for you. Yeah. I would never want a man to just sit in their own heartache. There's always some place where you can find some sense of relief.
Yeah, and I know one thing that helped me was joining a men's group.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the first step, was to get around some other guys that I could feel comfortable talking and sharing with. So I'm a loner by nature, so I enjoy sometimes being, and this is outside of therapy, but just reading and kind of working on myself. But it was good to kind of have that tribe, like people like to use that word a lot nowadays, to get around like-minded men. And I've been involved in men's groups for the last couple of years, and I'm probably going to be starting another one here in the new year with some guys, like a smaller group of guys that more my age that have more similar life experience. But yeah, that's good advice to kind of keep moving. I like that. It kind of goes back to that word you said earlier, which I think the word kinetic is a cool word. You're in motion, get moving, and don't sit still, which is really good advice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know you got a busy schedule, and it's an honor to have you on the show. And I'm looking forward to finishing this book and then checking out your latest book that you've got coming out too.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sharon.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.